The air in the small alley of Lucknow smelled of freshly cooked kebabs and rosewater, the signs that Eid was near. Children ran around in new clothes, holding balloons, their faces lit with joy. But in a dim corner of the same alley, in a crumbling room with broken tiles and a flickering bulb, lived Zubaida, a mother of 3, widowed young and worn by life. Zubaida wiped the sweat off her forehead as she stirred the watery dal boiling in the pot. Her eyes kept glancing at the door. It was the 28th Rosa today, just 2 days before Eid, and her children hadn't returned from the madrasa yet. Her hands trembled not from the heat, but from the worry that had become a part of her since her husband Rais died in a factory explosion 3 years ago. Since then, every Eid had passed like a test from Allah, one harder than the last. She had nothing. No money for new clothes, no meat to cook, not even sheer kurma for the kids. She had managed to save just 60 rupees this Ramadan, half of which went to medicines for her youngest son Imran, who had a weak heart. The remaining money was hidden under her mattress. She was saving it for a packet of milk and sevian. That was all she could afford. "Ami!" came a voice from outside, followed by the sound of bare feet rushing in. Imran entered, his tiny face flushed, his cotton kurta soaked in sweat. Behind him were his elder siblings, Faizan and Amina, aged 12 and 10. They looked exhausted, their eyes drooping but wide with excitement. "What happened, Mir Bachchon?" Zubaida asked, quickly wiping her hands on her dupatta. "Ami," Faizan said, placing a small plastic bag on the floor. "Look, we got some rations. Uncle Majid at the madrasa gave it. He said someone donated for poor families." Zubaida's eyes watered as she saw a few essentials: 1/2 kilo rice, some oil, a little sugar. She hugged all 3 children tightly. It wasn't much, but to her it felt like Allah had heard her silent prayers. That night, Zubaida sat awake while her children slept beside her. She gently stroked Amina's hair and looked at their innocent faces. "Kaise manaungi inke liye?" "Eid?" she whispered to herself. She remembered how Rais used to bring balloons, bangles for Amina, and a new kurta pajama set for Faizan. He used to lift Imran high on his shoulders and laugh loud, filling the house with life. Now even their laughter seemed rare. The next morning, Zubaida made a decision. She wrapped her old dupatta around her head and left early for the nearby basti. She had heard that a rich family in the main colony was distributing Eid clothes to the poor. She reached there after walking 2 kilometers barefoot, only to find a huge crowd. She stood in the line for over an hour, her body aching, her throat parched. When finally her turn came, the volunteer looked at her from head to toe and handed her a small packet. "Next!" he shouted. She opened the packet after stepping aside. Inside was 1 child-size kurta, clearly used, and a pair of faded leggings. Not enough for 3 kids, but she smiled through her disappointment. "Maybe I can alter this and make it fit for Amina," she thought. She returned home limping from the blisters on her feet, but didn't let the pain show. Her kids were already awake and waiting. They didn't ask for gifts. They never did. Maybe they had already learned to suppress their desires. That evening, Zubaida sat beside her broken stove and started stitching the kurta with old pieces from her own clothes to create makeshift Eid outfits. Her fingers bled from the needle pricks, but she kept going. As the moon for Eid was sighted and the sounds of Chandrat Mubarak echoed across the street, Amina sat beside her and softly asked, "Ammi, kya is Eid pe bhi hum sirf roti khayenge?" Zubaida couldn't answer. Her eyes welled up, but she forced a smile. Little did she know her children had already sensed her pain and were quietly preparing for something that would soon break her heart. Eid morning arrived with the sound of the azan echoing across the rooftops. The entire mohalla was alive, families bustling around, men rushing to the mosque in crisp white kurtas, women preparing lavish breakfasts, and kids showing off their shiny clothes and plastic jewelry. But inside Zubaida's home, silence hung in the air like a heavy cloud. She woke up before dawn to boil the little rice and sugar she had received. She added water and stirred it into a thin kheer, praying it would taste sweet enough to feel like Eid. She placed 3 small bowls on the floor and looked over at her children. They were still asleep, or so she thought. Faizan and Amina had already woken before her and sat silently under the broken window outside, whispering with Imran in low voices. अगर हम ये कर दें, तो अम्मी के लिए कम से कम एक ईद की खुशी हो जाएगी, Faizan said, his voice shaky. लेकिन Faizu भाई अगर पकड़े गए तो, Amina whispered back. Faizan looked at his sister with teary eyes. आमी ने तो हमेशा हमारे लिए किया. क्या हम एक दिन उनके लिए नहीं कर सकते? Imran, weak and coughing, simply nodded. मैं भी चलूंगा, he said. No, तू घर पे रुकेगा, Faizan ordered gently. तू कमजोर है, हम जाते हैं. By the time Zubaida came to wake them, she found only Imran sitting inside. Faizan और Amina कहाँ हैं? She asked, panicking. Imran looked down. वो, थोड़ी देर में आ जाएंगे. Zubaida's heart raced. She stepped outside, scanned the narrow gully but couldn't find them. A sick feeling twisted in her stomach. She returned and held Imran close. Sach bata beta, bhai behan kahan gaye hain? She asked, her voice trembling. Imran hesitated, then slowly said, वो कह रहे थे अम्मी के लिए कुछ लाना है ईद पे. Zubaida sat back as if struck. She stared at the wall, her mind racing. The city was not kind to poor children. She had seen enough news of missing kids, theft, and even child beggars forced into gangs. Her chest tightened. She wanted to run out, scream, search every corner. But where would she begin? Hours passed. The kir had gone cold. The azan for Eid prayers echoed again. People returned from the mosque with bags of biryani, seviyan, and gifts. Children knocked at their neighbors' doors, hugging and yelling, Eid Mubarak! But Zubaida sat motionless, her eyes glued to the door. Finally, just past noon, the door creaked open. Faizan and Amina entered quietly. Their faces were dusty, their clothes torn a little, and Faizan had a small cut near his eyebrow. But they were smiling. Zubaida rushed to them and hugged them tightly. Tum log kahan chale gaye the? Kisne mara? Ye chot kaisi lagi, Faizan? She cried, holding his face in her hands. Faizan looked down, ashamed but proud. Ammi, हम ईद के दिन आपके लिए एक गिफ्ट लाना चाहते थे. आप हमेशा हमारे लिए करती हो. इस बार हम सोच के आए थे. Amina pulled out a small plastic bag from under her kurta. Inside was a new dupatta, bright pink, the color Zubaida used to love wearing before Rais died. Zubaida stared at it, stunned. Yeah. कहाँ से? Faizan looked down. स्टेशन के पास एक दुकान थी. वहां के अंदर एक बड़ा डस्टबिन था. उन्होंने पुरानी चीजें और कुछ नए कपड़े फेंके थे. हमने वही से ढूंढ के लाए हैं. हमने कुछ नहीं चुराया अम्मी, बस उठाया. और एक अंकल ने पकड़ लिया, इसीलिए चोट लग गई. पर उन्होंने फिर छोड़ दिया जब हमने बताया कि अम्मी के लिए ला रहे हैं. Zubaida's eyes filled with tears. She hugged them both tightly, unable to speak. In that moment, the pain, the shame, the hunger, everything melted into something she hadn't felt in years, love that overcame every misery. She took the dupatta and held it to her chest like it was made of silk and gold. Tum saab se baade tofe ho mere liye, she whispered. They sat together, shared the little kir, and for the first time in many years it truly felt like Eid. But what Zubaida didn't know was, this wasn't the end of her children's struggle. Something else had happened at the station, something they hadn't yet told her. As the sun began to set, the narrow lanes of the Basti quieted down. The noise of children playing faded, replaced by the occasional clatter of utensils and the soft hum of distant laughter. Inside the tiny room, Zubaida sat with her children, gently running her fingers through Amina's hair, while Faizan dozed off with his head on her lap. Imran had fallen asleep too, clutching the pink dupatta she had hung on the wall with a rusty nail, her most precious possession now. But Zubaida's heart, though overwhelmed by her children's love, was restless. She kept remembering Faizan's cut, the hesitation in Amina's voice, the way they kept exchanging silent glances. Something wasn't right. Something more had happened. She waited until Faizan stirred and slowly opened his eyes. Beta, she said softly, ab sach batao. Aur kya hua tha wahan? Faizan looked at her, then away. His jaw tightened. Kuch nahi, ammi. Faizu, she said more firmly this time, main teri maa hoon. Tere chehre se hi sab samajh jati hoon. Amina sat up slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Ammi, wahan ek aadmi tha. Zubaida's breath caught in her throat. Kaunsa admi? He was watching us, Faizan muttered, his voice low. We thought he was a shopkeeper or maybe a guard, but he He followed us after we took the dupatta from the trash. We didn't steal it, Ammi, sach keh rahe hain, but he grabbed me, Amina said, her voice cracking. उसने पकड़ लिया और बोला कि चोरी कर रहे हो। फैजू भाई ने मुझे छुड़ाया। तब उस आदमी ने फैजान को मुक्का मारा. Zubaida felt her blood run cold. Phir? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He kept shouting that he'll call the police. He said he'd throw us in jail for theft. But when Faizan folded his hands and begged him, told him it was for our Ami's aid, something changed. In that man's eyes, Amina's voice became softer. He looked at Faizubai's torn slippers, then he looked at us again, and then he walked away quietly. Didn't say a word. Zubaida closed her eyes, her chest burning. Her hands trembled as she touched the bruise on Faizan's forehead. She knew what shame and helplessness felt like, but this, her children being accused, hurt, insulted, it was a pain she hadn't tasted before. I'm sorry, Ami, Faizan said, voice quivering. हम बस आपके लिए कुछ अच्छा करना चाहते थे. Zubaida hugged them tightly, as if to protect them from every evil in the world. तुमने कुछ गलत नहीं किया, she whispered. तुम मेरे लिए सबसे अच्छे हो, मेरे दिल का सुकून हो. That night she couldn't sleep. Her children were growing up too fast, bearing burdens that even grown men failed to carry. Poverty had turned them into survivors, clever, brave, and painfully aware of the world's cruelty. Zubaida got up quietly and stepped outside. The moon shone full and clear in the sky, bathing the rooftops in silver light. She walked slowly to the edge of the gully, watching the empty street. She felt small under the vast sky, just another forgotten mother among millions. But then she thought of Faizan's bruised face, Amina's trembling hands, and Imran's fragile smile. And something inside her shifted. She couldn't let this be their life forever. The next morning, as her children still slept, Zubaida wrapped the pink dupatta around her shoulders and stepped out. Her legs shook, but her eyes held fire. She walked toward the main city, to the homes of the rich she had always avoided. This time not for charity, but for work. She had made up her mind. If her children could risk everything for her happiness, then she could surely swallow her pride for their future. But what waited for her out there wasn't just hard work. It was a decision that would force her to choose between dignity and desperation. The city buzzed with life. Cars zipped by, perfume shops played Bollywood songs, and rickshaw pullers yelled over each other to get customers. Zubaida stood at the edge of it all, barefoot, sweating, and uncertain. She had wrapped the pink dupatta tightly around her, as if it could protect her from the sharp eyes of the world. She had no idea where to start. She went to the market near Kaiserbar, asking at each stall and shop if they needed help, jadu pocha, cooking, babysitting. But most looked at her like she was invisible. Some waved her away without even looking up. Others gave her false promises. Kal ana. Manager se पूछना पड़ेगा. Aaj काम नहीं है. It had been 3 hours. Her legs ached. Her throat was dry. But still she kept walking. She finally reached a posh bungalow near Hazratganj. A huge iron gate stood before her, shining in the sun. The kind of house she used to walk past with Race and dream silently, of someday living a life where her children didn't sleep hungry. Zubaida rang the bell, heart thudding like a drum. A guard peeked out. Kaun hai? He asked harshly. Bhai Saab, naukri chahiye, she said softly. Bartan dho sakti hoon, pocha laga sakti hoon, bachchon ki madad bhi kar lungi. The guard laughed under his breath. पहले तो देखो कैसे लग रही हो, साफ कपड़े भी नहीं हैं. मैडम तो देख के ही मना कर देगी. Zubaida swallowed, her pride. Bhaiya aid hai, bas ek moka de do. The guard shrugged and walked inside. A minute later, a lady appeared behind him. Tall, sharp-featured, with perfectly draped silk and lipstick brighter than anything Zubaida had ever owned. Kya chahiye? The woman asked. Zubaida folded her hands. Behen ji, काम चाहिए. 3 बच्चे हैं. एड पे उनके लिए रोटी का जुगाड़ भी मुश्किल हो गया है. The woman stared at her, not with cruelty, but something worse, disinterest. You people only remember work when it's Eid or Diwali, she said coldly. पहले आके बर्तन गिरा देते हो, फिर बीमारी का बहाना बना के छुट्टी ले लेते हो. नहीं, मैडम ऐसी नहीं हूं मैं, Zubaida whispered. मैं मेहनत करूंगी. आप एक दिन का काम देख लो, अगर पसंद आए तो रख लेना, नहीं आए तो चली जाऊंगी. There was silence. Finally the woman sighed. ठीक है, अंदर आओ. पोछा लगा. दो ड्राइंग रूम में. और बर्तन भी साफ कर दो. और सुनो, चोरी वगैरह का चक्कर निकला तो सीधा पुलिस को बुलाऊंगी. Zubaida nodded, her hands shaking. She entered the bungalow. The floor felt like marble under her calloused feet. The smell of mutton biryani and itar filled the space. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. She got on her knees and started scrubbing. Every second she spent in that house, her heart burned. Not with anger, but shame. She had never begged like this, never cleaned another's toilet. Never been ordered around like a dog, but she kept going, thinking only of her children. After 3 hours, the lady handed her 100-rupee note and a leftover box of biryani. Ye le ja, kal bhi ana, subah 9 baje. Zubaida nodded, tears in her eyes. When she returned home, her children jumped to their feet. Ami, kaya hua? She opened the steel box. The smell of real biryani, meat, spices, potatoes, filled the air. Ammi ne kaam dhoond liya, she said with a weak smile. Aur ye Eid ka khana, mere bachchon ke liye. Imran couldn't believe it. Asli biryani? Amina hugged her. Ammi, aap sabse best ho. Zubaida laughed softly, holding them close. But deep inside, a wound had formed, silent, invisible, but deep. Because for that biryani and 100 rupees, she had left behind something she couldn't explain. Her self-respect. That night she stared at the ceiling, wondering, was this the price of motherhood? But she had no idea that soon she'd be asked to pay a price even heavier, one that might take away a piece of her soul. The next morning, Zubaida woke up before the sun, her body aching from the work she did the day before. She didn't have new clothes, but she wore her cleanest salwar kameez, carefully tucking in the corners, pinning the dupatta with safety pins so it wouldn't slip off. Her fingers ran over the pink dupatta her children brought her, her only luxury, her only pride. She kissed each child on the forehead before leaving. Main jaldi lautungi, she whispered. Tum log kuch mat karna, gar main hi rehna, as... She stepped out. The city was still half asleep. The streets were quieter, the wind softer, but her heart thudded louder than ever. She reached the bungalow and rang the bell. The guard opened the gate without a word now. She entered and immediately got to work, washing utensils, sweeping the porch, dusting the large sofa sets that probably cost more than her entire house. The same madam. Her name was Rukhsar, said sipping chai and scrolling her phone. After an hour, Rukhsar called her into the kitchen. Zubaida, she said, not looking up. मेरे मेहमान आने वाले हैं रात में, एक पार्टी है. तुम रात में रुक सकती हो क्या? काम ज्यादा है. जुबैदा फ्रोजे. रात में? हाँ, खाना बनाना है, सफाई भी. तुम्हें छोड़ दूंगी रिक्शा से जब काम हो जाए. तुम जानती हो, मैं पैसा थोड़ा एक्स्ट्रा भी दे दूंगी. Zubaida hesitated. Her children were alone. Imran needed his medicine at night, and Faizan got nervous when she wasn't home. Madam, bachche akilai hain. छोटे हैं. रुखसार raised an eyebrow. तो क्या? तुम्हारे जैसे लोगों के पास ऑप्शन होता है क्या? एक रात की बात है. पैसा चाहिए या नहीं? Zubaida looked down. Her heart broke a little more. But she nodded. Thick hai, madam. The entire day passed in a haze of labor. Zubaida cooked mutton curry, kneaded dough for nayans, fried kebabs until her hands smelled of masala and sweat. She stood most of the day, back bent, hands cracked, legs shaking. As evening fell, guests started arriving. Well-dressed women in embroidered saris, men with gold watches and expensive perfumes. The house filled with laughter and clinking glasses. Music played. No one looked at Zubaida. She moved around like a ghost, serving, cleaning, obeying Ade. Around 10 p.m., when she finally sat down near the kitchen to rest for a few minutes, Rukhsar entered with 2 men. One of them, a heavy-set man with a red face and cigar in his mouth, pointed toward Zubaida. Ye kaun hai? Kamwali hai, Rukhsar replied, sipping her wine. The man stared at Zubaida for a moment too long. Kafi jawan lagti hai, he said with a laugh. Zubaida immediately stood up, pulling her dupatta tighter. Chao Zubaida, Rukhsar said suddenly, her tone different. Uncle ki help kar. Zubaida looked confused. Madam? Unka phone charger andar bedroom mein hai. Dikha de. अंदर ले जा. Zubaida didn't move. Something didn't feel right. Rukhsar's eyes narrowed. काम कर रही हो ना? तो काम Caro. Zubaida's hands trembled. She knew what this was. She wasn't dumb, she had heard stories. But this was happening to her. Her, a mother who just wanted to feed her children. She took one step back. माफ कीजिए मैडम, मैं ये काम नहीं कर सकती. The room fell silent. The man scoffed and turned away. Forget it. यह भी नखरे वाली निकली. Rukhsar's expression turned cold as ice. तो अभी निकाल यहाँ से. खाना खाया, काम किया, पैसा भी नहीं मिलेगा. Zubaida didn't say a word. She walked out, head held low, shame biting into her skin. The wind outside was colder now. Her legs barely carried her to the main road, where she waited an hour for a shared rickshaw. By the time she reached home, it was almost midnight. Faizan opened the door, eyes red, face pale. Ami, kahan chali gayi thi? Kitni der laga di? She hugged him. Her hands shook. Amina cried quietly beside them. Imran had fallen asleep, crying, calling for her. Zubaida looked at all three of them, her Jaan, her Roo, and whispered, "Main kabhi tumse dur nahi jaungi." But inside something had died. She had walked away with her dignity tonight. But for how long could she keep choosing hunger over humiliation? The days after Eid passed quietly, but not peacefully. Zubaida no longer returned to Rukhsar's house. She couldn't. Every time she thought of that night, the eyes of that man, Rukhsar's tone, the way her worth had been measured in silence, she felt like her soul had been slapped. Her children noticed the change. She smiled less. She talked less. And though she tried hiding it, they saw the fear in her eyes every time someone knocked at the door. Food ran low again. The little Eid biryani had long been eaten. The extra 100 rupees were gone. Medicine for Imran, some bread, some lentils. Amina offered to help with work, but Zubaida refused. She wouldn't let her daughter step into a world so cruel. One afternoon, Faizan came running into the room. Ami, he panted out of breath. एक दुकान का बोर्ड लगा है पीपाल के पास वाली गली में. नौकर रख रहे हैं, बच्चों को भी. Zubaida stood up, alarmed. कौन सी दुकान, क्या काम? सब्जियों की पैकिंग और डिलीवरी अम्मी, हल्का काम है. रोज 2 रुपए मिलेंगे. Zubaida's heart sank. 10 rupees a day. It sounded like nothing, but for a child like Faizan, it meant everything. मैं जाऊंगा अम्मी, Faizan said firmly. मैं अब छोटा नहीं हूं, मैं मदद कर सकता हूं. Zubaida didn't answer at first. She looked at her son, only 12, thin as a stick, wearing torn slippers, and yet his eyes burned with the desire to save his family. अम्मी एक दिन सिर्फ, he pleaded. अगर ठीक लगा तो रख लेना मुझे, अगर नहीं तो बैंड कर देना. That evening, Zubaida walked with Faizan to the vegetable shop. A tall man, in his 40s, stood there smoking a bidi, talking to someone about rates. His name was Murad. Kaam chahiye? He asked, looking Faizan up and down. Ji, Zubaida answered. Ladka kaam karega. Sirf agar kaam theek ho. Murad spat to the side and nodded. Subah 6 baje aana. Patti chhantne hain, फिर पैकेट्स बनाने हैं. ज्यादा शोर शराबा नहीं चाहिए. टाइम पे काम करो, पैसा मिलेगा. Zubaida didn't like his tone, but she had no choice left. The next day, Faizan started work. He left before dawn, came back tired but happy, with 10 rupees clutched in his fist and a few leftover carrots from the shop. Aaj sab kuch sahi gaya, Ami, he said with a grin. Murad bhai ne danta bhi nahi. Zubaida smiled, but her heart still worried. What if Faizan fell ill? What if someone mistreated him? But days passed, and things began to look a little better. 10 rupees became 20. Faizan even helped bring potatoes and onions home. Amina started tutoring a younger girl in the lane, and the girl's mother gave her milk sometimes in return. For the first time, they weren't starving. But happiness in Zubaida's life was like winter sun, soft, rare, and never lasting. One evening, Faizan came home late. His face was pale, his hands trembled. Ami, he whispered, main dobra wahan nahi jaunga. Zubaida rushed to him. Kya hua? He sat down slowly and looked at her, like he had seen something too dark for his young heart. Murad bhai aaj गुस्से में थे. एक दूसरे लड़के ने सब्जी गिरा दी, तो मुराद ने उसे पीट दिया लोहे के रोड से, सबके सामने. Zubaida gasped. क्या? तुम थे वहां? फैजान nodded slowly. मैं सब देख रहा था अम्मी। वो लड़का रो रहा था, चेहरा खून से भर गया था। मुराद चिल्लाता रहा, मारते रहा। Tears streamed down his face. I got scared, अम्मी, बहुत ज्यादा। Zubaida held him close, hands trembling. तुम वहां नहीं जाओगे, कभी नहीं। She didn't care about the money anymore. She would rather be hungry than send her child into the arms of a monster. But as the days passed, the money dried up again. The leftover milk stopped. Imran's cough grew worse. And one night, as Amina lay beside her, she said softly, "Ami, मैं काम कर सकती हूँ, सिलाई सीख लूंगी, या किसी आंटी के बच्चे संभाल लूंगी, बस भाई को वापस उस दुकान पे मत भेजना." Zubaida stared at the ceiling, her heart in pieces. Her daughter was now offering to step into the fire, just to protect her brother. Her children were fighting a war they never chose, and she was losing her strength to keep them safe. Zubaida barely slept that night. Her daughter's words kept ringing in her ears. Bas bhai ko wapas us dukan pe mat bhejna. She had always dreamed her children would study, laugh, play, live the kind of life she and Reyes never got. But now they were bargaining with their own childhood, sacrificing it piece by piece. And she, their mother, couldn't do anything except watch them burn slowly, while pretending everything was fine. By the time morning came, Zubaida had made a decision. She didn't have a plan, no miracle solution. But she couldn't let her children keep carrying the weight of poverty. She took the remaining few rupees she had and wrapped the pink dupatta around her once again. Her feet carried her to the heart of the city, not to beg but to fight. She went to 5 different houses, knocking at gates, asking for cleaning jobs, offering to work extra hours for even less pay. She promised loyalty, hard work, no excuses. Most still turned her away, but one lady, an old widow named Shaista, opened her door. "You look tired, Betty," she said softly. "Have you eaten anything?" Zubaida's lips trembled. "I haven't come to eat, just to work." Shaista stared at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "I don't have much," she said. "Just a 2-room flat, but I can't clean properly anymore. If you're okay with little pay and honest work, and you can start today." Zubaida folded her hands in gratitude. "Allah aapko khush rakhe, Baji." That day, Zubaida cleaned, cooked, dusted, and even gave Shaista a head massage. And when she returned home in the evening, she had 50 rupees and 2 parathas in her hand. Faizan and Amina rushed to her. "Ami, aaj aap ro nahi rahi ho?" Amina teased with a smile. Zubaida laughed, genuinely this time. "Nahi beta, aaj tumhari maa ne haar nahi mani." That week, things changed. Zubaida began working full-time at Shaista Baji's home. It was dignified, peaceful work. She even started learning to sew again. Shaista had an old sewing machine that still worked, and Zubaida spent a few minutes on it every evening. Her dream of opening a small tailoring corner sparked back to life. She also made sure Faizan stayed home. Amina continued her small tutoring, and Imran's cough got a little better with warm soup and the tablets Shaista helped her buy. But just when life seemed to be giving her a little space to breathe, it struck again. On the 6th evening of her new job, as Zubaida was leaving Shaista's flat, her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. Her heart stopped. She picked up. "Zubaida Begum," the voice said. "Ji, Kaun. This is Dr. Sharma from the community clinic. Your son Imran, he collapsed near the park. A boy brought him here. His breathing is very weak. You need to come fast." Zubaida nearly dropped the phone. She ran, barefoot, dupatta flying behind her, her legs pounding the ground like thunder. Her heart felt like it was breaking with every step. In just 10 minutes, she reached the tiny clinic on the corner of the road. A nurse pointed inside without saying a word. Imran lay on a rusted stretcher, unconscious, his lips blue, his chest rising and falling in tiny gasps. An oxygen mask covered half his face. Zubaida fell to her knees beside him. "Dr. Sahab, Kia. Wa mere bache ko?" Dr. Sharma looked serious. "We told you earlier, his heart is weak. He needs a full diagnosis and better medicine. He fainted due to shortness of breath." And this time it was close. She choked on her tears. "How much?" "The treatment. Tests alone will cost 1,500. After that, we'll know what meds he'll need regularly." 1,500. She barely had 15 rupees left in her pocket. "Dr. Sahab." Main garib hun, she begged. Please, kuch to... He cut her off. We've done what we can. If you want further help, bring money or arrange someone to sponsor him. She looked at her son, tiny and helpless. The same child who clutched her dupatta and cried when she came home late. The child who never asked for toys, only hugs. She stood up slowly, her hands trembled. But her eyes were steady now. She knew what she had to do, even if it meant going back to the same house, even if it meant walking through that fire, alone. Zubaida stood outside Rukhsar's bungalow once more. The same iron gate, the same stone in her chest, only this time she wasn't there for work. She was there for war. For her son's life. Pride, dignity, shame. Everything felt small compared to the fear of losing Imran. She rang the bell with a trembling finger. The guard opened it, surprised. Firse? Zubaida didn't answer. Rukhsar herself came to the door after a minute, still in her silk nightgown, holding a glass of juice. Oh, look who's back, she said, smirking. Zubaida folded her hands. Madam, madad chahiye. Rukhsar raised an eyebrow. Acha. Tab to bada gussa tha. Ab, beta hospital mein hai, Zubaida said, her voice breaking. Uska ilaaj nahi karwa pa rahi hoon. Main jo kaam kahoge, karungi. Sirf mere bache ko bacha lo. Rukhsar stared at her, lips pursed. 1,500, Zubaida nodded. Jitna madam kahengi, mujhe kuch nahi chahiye. Sirf ilaaj chahiye. For a moment there was silence. Then Rukhsar turned and walked inside. Zubaida stood outside, eyes down, hands clenched. A minute later, Rukhsar returned holding the money. Ye le cash, but kaam pura milega mujhe. Raat ka bhi. Zubaida took the money with shaking hands, her eyes brimming with tears. That night she worked in Rukhsar's house again. She didn't ask questions. She didn't protest. She did what was told, served who came, and endured what passed in silence, because she had made her peace with one thing. Her pain was cheaper than her son's life. The next morning, without a moment's rest, she rushed to the clinic. Imran was still weak, but conscious. She paid the fees, bought the medicine, and sat by his side, feeding him rice and broth with her own trembling hands. A week later, Imran could walk again. Faizan returned to school with the help of an NGO teacher Shaista had contacted. Amina began, learning stitching properly. Under Zubaida's quiet guidance, their life was still poor. But they were together, and Zubaida. She didn't return to Rukhsar's house again. The money had been a one-time thing, and her soul had paid full price. Instead, she started stitching clothes at home. Shaista helped her get 2 orders from her niece. Word spread slowly. Neighbors came with blouse requests, then uniform repairs, then small suit designs. She sat by the window, sewing late into the night, whispering prayers with every stitch. Her fingers still bore wounds. Her soul carried scars. But in her heart, she knew. She had given her children the only Eid gift that mattered, a mother who chose pain over pride, shames, over comfort and love, and over everything else. And that year, when the next Eid came, there were no new clothes. But there was food, laughter, and hope, which, in a life like Zubaida's, was everything.